Welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. The stories we present here are full-blooded, although, on occasion, the protagonists are not by the time the show is over. Consider this your one warning. PseudoPod, episode 858, March 24th, 2023. This week's stories, I love doing this bit, flash on the Borderlands 65, Fecundity. Hello everyone, welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alistair, your host, and this week we're opening with a quote. The surface of Earth heaved and seethed in fecund restlessness. Earth was most fertile where the most death was. That quote from Kurt Vonnegut's The Sirens of Titan stitches our stories together. Just maybe don't look too closely at what the stitches are made of. Life finds a way. Life doesn't care which way that is, only that there is air on the other side of the darkness it perpetually claws its way across. To step across the genres for a moment, and to stay in cinematic lens just for a couple more lines, like the man said, I want more life. These stories are about what happens when he gets that. When we all get that. Well, the lucky ones. Or perhaps not. Anyway, Sophie Sparrow's On the Getting of Husbands and the Spawning of Children first appeared in our Seneca in April 2021. Your narrator for this story is Cara Grace. Cara is a green witch who lives in Michigan but is always dreaming of running away to New Zealand and opening a crystal shop in the side of a mountain. You are most likely to find her deep in the woods, admiring and making friends with bugs and other wildlife, or underwater, watching the sunlight filter through the surface. She is an avid gardener and enamored with herbs and datura, which is moonflowers, I literally just learnt, in particular. She also enjoys moon rituals, creating herbal medicine, and hula hooping. She looks forward to a future where she can make a living using her voice to bring the written word to life, or alternately perfect a spell to turn herself into a fox and sneak away into the woods forever. The truth is blood, and what we do with it.
On the Getting of Husbands and the Spawning of Children by Sophie Sparrow, narrated by Cara Grace. Deep in the woods, where the sun's light never reaches to break apart the shadows, through a thicket of brambles and stinging shrubs, there stands a house. It is not made of gingerbread, nor does it walk on chickens' legs, but it is, for want of a better word, home. My deviltries need feeding. When there's no flesh to be had, my moonblood will do, and when there's none of that for months on end, they scream and keen and shiver in the night, hungry like wolves. Their branches rat-tat-tat on the roof, wood scraping on wood, and I feel chills run up my spine, and my palms go clammy, and I know that I must marry again. So many husbands. First, I must get them here, which isn't difficult, and then I must keep them here, which barely takes more skill, and then, afterwards, they are easily dispatched. I sell eggs in the village on market day, and if their yolks are tinted green, and if they sometimes hatch into bony chickenlings with red and scaly eyes, that's no concern of mine. The villagers will tolerate my presence, so long as I deal only with travelers. One approaches me now, a rich man, with deep green eyes that rake across me as I avert my own. Eggs? He asks, by way of an introduction. Each a copper penny, I reply, meeting his eyes properly at last. And how much for you? He asks with a grin, as though he is giving me a present. The attractive ones are all the same. Entitled. I take his arm and lead him into the forest, abandoning the eggs to the crows. Whore! One of the village boys spits as we walk away, arm in arm. I wish it were that simple. You remember the stories. Princesses with hair so fine and blonde, woodcutters' daughters who look after sick mothers, girls with tiny, delicate feet. They prove their worthiness and gain the prize, to end their stories at 17, married, their lives concluded. No one ever asks if they are really, truly happy ever after. The bone heap leers at me. My garden stinks of blood. My latest husband for the moment has gone to join the others. I am pregnant again, and the trees are sated. In time, their spirits will step out from beyond the bark to demand the baby, long nails clawing and scratching at my eyes. I don't know what the fairy devils want with so many human children. Can they not make babies of their own and leave me be? I stamp the feelings down like errant sparks. They only make the sylvan devils happy. It's better not to care. The swell of my belly has long since deflated, set back to a virginal, nubile flatness. How many times must I swell, diminish, start the whole process over? This life is a cyclical nightmare, a mill wheel that won't stop turning even when the river that powers it has long since dried up. It keeps going, to no end or purpose. This is what you wanted, I remind myself. This is what every woman wants. Beauty and eternal youth. Any man for the asking. 1,000 pretty babies. This is the soil in which happiness must grow. Too bad it's fertilized with blood and shit and lies. I am pregnant again and selling herbs at market. Rosemary, sage, marjoram. Not the soporifics and stupefacants the curse bids me use on my husbands. The scents drift up from the table to my nose, a hearth and home bouquet, its coziness tainted by the knowledge that it comes from a garden of bones. A woman, old by any reckoning but my own, approaches the stall. She's not anyone I know. Must have stepped down from the stagecoach like the husbands. She smiles a wizened smile at me, and I nod, grimly silent. "Oh, Rosemary," she says, clutches a handful to her nose. "My mother always said that rosemary smelled like hope." She said it confidingly, as though to a child, and of course, that's what she'll think me. 20-ish is close enough to make no difference. How odd that we two crones can look upon each other and see only youth. "Have you any eggs?" she says. "Nothing like eggs and rosemary for baking a good herb cake. Nutritious, you know." And for a moment I see her as she used to be, a young child always underfoot, getting in the way of the baking for the sake of the smell of a few dry leaves. The image leaves me breathless, shaking, suddenly violently nostalgic. "Not today," I say. I can't go back. It is far, far too late for that. But perhaps there is something else I still have the power to do. I stop eating. I stay in bed for 3 days and stare at nothing, biting my fingers red raw. The faint scraping of wood on wood is the musical accompaniment to my nightmares. The jellied mess that slithers out from between my thighs on the 4th day goes straight on the fire, despite the shaking of my hands. It pops, crackles, falls silent. To me, it is the sound of freedom. I thrust the poker deep into the flames and hold it there until it glows. And then, all it takes is a red-hot skewer driven through the heartwood right to the core. The trees howl like foxes in heat as I expend all the strength they've given me in one final conflagration. I walk away, throat sore from the smoke, and the years start to pour back on me, an avalanche of stolen time. The world is fuzzing over, its edges creeping black, and the last thing I know is a welcoming, familiar scent. Rosemary.
I'm, as those of you who have been here a while will know, the Hope Guy. I was described as chirpy recently, and honestly, I bloody love that. Hope, cheer, all of that stuff can be an act of courage, especially in horrific situations, and this is a horrific situation where that isn't just true, it's central to the story. Life, the life with the trees and crucially for the trees, is both prison and objective here. But for the first time in a long time, this is a story where the past isn't just a different country, it's one with no border restrictions and the promise of a better standard of living. The encounter with the little girl, now anything but, is both tragic and fiercely brave. There has to be something more, something else. There just has to be, and jumping for it takes everything. But everything is waiting when you make that jump, and you will, and when you do, you will make it, no matter what's behind you. And that brings us to The Chairmaker's Daughter by Gretchen Tesmer. This is a PseudoPod original, and Gretchen's first official foray into horror. Gretchen is a writer-attorney based in the US-Canadian Borderlands. She writes both short fiction and poetry, with work appearing or forthcoming in Nature, Strange Horizons, Daily Science Fiction, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and Fantasy and SF, among others. And your narrator for this is Summer Brooks. So get ready, because if you go down to the woods today, you're sure to find the truth.
The Chairmaker's Daughter by Gretchen Tesmer. Narrated by Summer Brooks. My father makes rocking chairs for rich people in the city. They crawl over each other to buy one, eyes sparkling on his unique designs and choice of lumber, dark and light wood twisted together in ways most limbs would never allow. Fragrance of blackberry, cherry, and wintergreen heightened by sanding down to the heartwood of rare trees, blackwood, Maisie's cherry bark, willow twine, and velvet ashglove. He finds the trees and brings them back from the shadowy hidden glens in Marshalsea Wood, where the rich folks won't ever go for fear of ghosts, giants, and mud on their pretty shoes. I've been helping my father in his workshop since I was as tall as a Jane Apple sapling. My nimble fingers twist in the willow twine to shape a scrolled rocker and braided backrest. I slide the draw knife over Maisie's cherry bark to carve out its softer, sweeter interior as father wields a fro club to break apart the blackwood, which always resists so stubbornly. I pick splinters out of my fingers and shavings out of my braids at the end of every day. I like working with wood. I like the smoothness of a worn grain and the crack of bark tearing off the wood beneath. Or I did, anyway, until last Wednesday, when Father said I should come with him to Marshalsea Wood to find a blackwood with white bark to fill a special order. "Would you like to go with me tomorrow, Aurelia?" he asked at the end of the day, with the iron head of his adze held loosely in his brawny right hand. I nodded eagerly. He'd never let me go with him before. "Good. You're old enough now, and I want you to understand what we do," he said, in a distant tone that betrayed the existence of secrets. I felt a chill go through me, like someone cracked a window open in early March, and I narrowed my eyes at his words. But he said no more, and I didn't press him. Neither one of us is very fond of talking. We left the house at dawn the next morning, with early autumn frost painting the edges of our cabin windows in tinsel threads, all silver and white. The ground crunched underfoot, and I could see my breath as I followed him out the back door, looping my scarf around my neck twice. Marshalsea Wood is old. The moss and ivy that twists around the tree branches has gone gray with age. The forest floor is a mess of tangled roots that must be crawled and stumbled over. Father's long stride knew the path blindfolded, but I tripped over every knot and stone that jutted out from the dark earth. In the deep woods, where Father led me, sunlight is sparse. It filters in through the thick canopy, above only where it can find a hole to squeeze through. But the trees down there! Maisie's cherry bark fills the air with such lovely scents, 10 times stronger than in the hunks of dead wood on my workshop table. And the cold beauty of velvet ashglove, cluttered in a grove together, with their soft slate blue bark smoothing out any blemishes or imperfections in the wood beneath. Oh, I had to touch it. So I did. With my palm flat against the trunk of the first one I saw, I stretched my fingers out against its unusual skin, noting the small, nearly invisible hairs, all soft as velvet. But then, so suddenly at that first touch, I heard a ragged voice in my head, rushing through a memory that wasn't mine. The burning of great towers in a king's country while the knives bite against my sister's ankles, and they tear us to pieces. They flay our skin from the bone. I've tried to tell him. Mother, I've tried to scream. Your silence will splinter my heart. I can only beg for fire, fire, fire to make it stop. My hand came away just as suddenly, though I wasn't the one who pulled it away. With touch severed, I heard no more of the voice and the vision of hot flames, which had grown louder and louder in my head while the voice lamented, vanished. I was kneeling on damp green moss where the morning's frost was melting. It shouldn't be melting. Without sunlight, the air in the forest remained frigid late into midday. My wrist was in my father's grasp. He had pulled my hand down from the velvet ashglove, and he was shaking his head grimly. "No, maid," he said to me. "Not that one." He released my hand. My fingers curled back into my fist, and I was surprised to feel the sting of heat lingered, despite the chill of the morning. "Are the others?" I couldn't finish the strange thought, not out loud, but he must have guessed my thoughts. "Are the others like that? Do the trees talk to you, Father? And still you cut them down?" Father shrugged. The expression on his face seemed conflicted. He explained gently, "The others are quieter, and we need the money." I suppose I should have seen it sooner. I thought we were just making furniture. As Father turned and continued on, I followed him. But I rose from my knees slowly, still rattled by the echoes of the velvet ashglove and her haunting voice. "Your father's a murderer, Aurelia, and you've been carving up bones."
Wow, this one, especially in formation with the other two, hits like a train. The spectrum of emotion wrapped up in this line. The others are quieter, and we need the money, is a rainbow of horror, guilt, complicity, determination, and justification. It's all in there, and while the woods are dark and deep, and the lead's father knows the way in, the way out is one I choose to believe she will be charting. She listens in the exact way he doesn't. She knows this isn't a life that can go on. She knows what they will pay to escape. She knows it's worth it. Just like us. Good luck. And speaking of luck, that speaks pretty viscerally to our last story. Concerning the fantastic native flora of the Indo-Chinese Padma Valley is by Wenyi Li, and it is a PseudoPod original. Wenyi Li likes writing about girls with bite, feral nature, and ghosts, and her forthcoming debut novel, The Dark We Know, due next year, has a bit of all three. A Clarion West alum from Singapore, her shorter work has appeared in Nightmare, Strange Horizons, and Uncanny, among others. She can be found on social media at her Twitter account and otherwise at whenyeelywrites.com. We will, of course, put all the links in the show notes. Your narrator for this week is the incomparable Mr. Wilson Fowley, Esquire. So, without further ado, it's time for a letter from Padma Valley. A letter that will tell you and the rest of us the truth.
Concerning the Fantastic Native Flora of the Indo-Chinese Padma Valley by Wenyi Li, narrated by Wilson Fowley. To tell you the truth, had I been alone, and had there been no witnesses, I should, I think, have been fearful of mentioning the dimensions of this flower. Joseph Arnold, 1818. My dear Professor, forgive the delay of this letter. I have been feeling rather unwell. I am quite unsuited to the climate here still. How bright, and the air so thick with latent precipitation. Dr. Macpherson assures me it is not the pestilential dengue fever that besets so many here, and yet the queasiness in my belly and aching heat in my muscles makes me fear the worst. But then I have always been predisposed to paranoia. But how tedious an introduction for so thrilling a subject! Had I not fallen ill, this report would already be in your hands, so anxious have I been to share it. But I am afraid the notes alone do no justice to the discovery, and so I will labor to capture it in words here. I arrived in Sumatra some weeks ago, and was received by Thomas with exuberant hospitality. He was greatly anticipating a jungle expedition, having heard rumors of a valley of mythical flowers. He was giddy as a schoolboy, and I found myself swept up in his enthusiasm. The servants were trepidatious of the whole endeavor. It was from them that Thomas had received these rumors, yet it took a great deal of cajoling and instruction before 3 of them agreed to accompany us. Curious, I asked after their fear, and learned that the Padma flowers, as they were called, were believed to be some dark spirit manifest. Those who visited the valley never returned. Certainly the Malays possess great tales of things that lurk in the jungles. I was perhaps even more keen to see these flowers in person after hearing the story, as so rarely does one encounter a corporeal folk tale. We set out on the morning of the 18th of May. It was predictably humid, the jungle of the wild sort that would swallow one whole, a true haven for naturalists such as ourselves, if the weather were not so disagreeable. How much uncharted knowledge lives in these shadows, waiting only for illumination. But I digress with my ambitions. We trekked the path that Thomas had cobbled together from hearsay and estimation. Truly, he is a pioneer of Indochina. I doubt any other knows the terrain and its spectres so well as he. He led us with acuity and no little good spirits. We discussed his exploits in Malaya, with intervals of noting some plant or other, or the glimpse of some creature amidst the trees. I hoped for a tiger, though we were under-equipped to battle one. We saw no feline, but all around us the jungle murmured, and the jutting roots and dangling vines seemed to shiver as we passed. Something always scuttled, whether overhead or underfoot. It was perhaps the early afternoon that the smell began to permeate. A ghastly gallows odor, the stench of death, pouring over the sweet loam of the trees. One of the servants cried out and looked pale. "Masters," they bid us, "we must go back. This is the warning of the demons." I must admit to being taken aback, but where will science advance if we are frightened by something so ridiculous as an unpleasant smell? Thomas shared my mind. In fact, he was excited by the stench. "We must be near," he said, examining the ground. The land was beginning to slope on either side. We were approaching a depressed terrain. The servants trembled and begged us once more to turn away. But even as they pled, Thomas shouted in triumph. He had seen something in the near distance. We moved with haste, chopping at the tangling vines, and within minutes Thomas's discovery opened ahead of us. I doubt words can do the sight justice. Picture a valley of fairly regular proportions, thick in the upper slopes with the usual jungle growth. On the declines, however, picture great flaps of pitted red flesh attached around cavernous mouths. Picture hundreds of these, blanketing the lower floor of the valley, each from tip to tip the length of an arm. Such were the Padma flowers, like monstrous flayed lotuses gaping at the sky. Here was the source of the stench. Each flower grew and yet rotted, flies teeming by the dozens over each mouth. Upon the sight, the servants ran. Thomas and I shouted after them, but they were already gone, vanished in the undergrowth. It was no matter, we knew our way back. More significantly, we bent to examine the nearest bloom. Closer inspection revealed protrusions within the flower's maw, long flesh spines like teeth or bloated hairs. Yet more perplexingly, the flower seemed to have neither stem nor root nor leaves. It did not seem plant in any scope of my knowledge of the vegetal world. How did it obtain its nutrients? There would be plenty of rainfall, but how did it absorb the precipitation? The smell was overwhelming, and we pressed our sleeves to our faces as we conducted our examination. My notes provide observations in more scientific detail. Simultaneously, we fended off a seeming swarm of insects. Ants and flies crawled in and out of the gaping mouths, likely fooled by the carrion stench, and they spilled over our boots in their paths. Some crawled up our shirts and bit with irritating stings. The things we do for science. I suspect the insects are pollinators, although I see no reproductive organs. It was I who knelt to peer under the flower proper, discovering that I could have fit my head in the flower's looming mouth with room to spare, and realized that it was not, in fact, untethered. Rather, it burst forth from a brown vine that snaked against the ground. The disproportion in size was nearly comical, and frankly fascinating. Dozens of the flowers sprouted along one narrow vine. How did it support them all? Nevertheless, there was our answer. The flower was a parasite. By then it was growing late. We cut a specimen of the flower to take with us, and a portion of the vine as well. I have never fetted such a heavy bloom. It was damp to the touch and spongy, the roughness of each petal truly reminiscent of dermis. I write this days later to share our subsequent findings. The Padma is truly a most remarkable organism. The flower itself is only a small part of a much more extensive plant, the only visible part. When I examined the cross-section of the host vine, you see, I found a teeming mass of foreign tendrils worming through its walls. It seems that the seed implants itself in the vine and bursts through to bud when it has leached enough nutrients. It is a wonder that the vine still lived at all, so choked it was with the parasitic Hastoria. I imagine each tendril stretches on and on, twining up the vine. That solves the question of nutrition, but there are so many more mysteries to be unveiled. How long does it live? How does it reproduce? How do they grow in such abundance when there are certainly not so many vines? I must conclude. Dr. Macpherson will arrive soon. This illness is like nothing I have ever felt. My limbs feel heavy, and I struggle to breathe. Something in this foreign place has clogged my arteries. I am tired no matter how much I rest. My stomach feels bloated, and yet my appetite never seems to cease. Thomas's wife never fails to remark how much we eat for sick men. She jokes that we are like women with child. I suspect we fell afoul of some virulent insect. Upon our return from the valley, my first bath revealed swollen bites on my stomach. The swelling has now abated, but there seems to be a growing weight in my belly just beneath the bites. Yesterday I felt it for the first time, a budding lump the size of my palm pressing at the flesh. Faint lines radiate from it, running under my skin like freshly formed veins. It is strangely beautiful. I feel an inexplicable tenderness toward it. Perhaps it is my lack of sleep. I confess, Professor, to an obsession with the valley growing within me, winding through my veins. I see that field of gaping red in the shutter of my eyelids. I dream my name rooted in its furrows. I cannot help but feel as though this is the epiphany from which my legacy will arise. Thomas has been equally indisposed, but he admitted last night that he feels the same way. Something momentous is about to bloom. We are being drawn to greater purpose, one that transcends us as individual organisms. We must return soon. In the meantime, I bid you visit us, so that we may show you our wondrous place. Yours, Joseph.
Life as a prison, persistence rather than existence, is something that's at the core of these stories, and it's fascinating to me that they all look at different phases of that process. Sparrow's piece is at the end of the line, the way out of the woods. Tesma's is the way in, and the unanswered question of how long it's going to take to get out. Lee's is different again. Boundaries crossed with no conscious memory, petals for teeth, a jaunty letter home, a coping mechanism of language, a last vestige of life that even as we read begins to be subsumed by the roots of what comes next. Oh no, there is no way out here, and anyone who finds it won't be who they were when they came in. Life finds a way. Life always finds a way. What a great trio of stories. Thanks to our authors, our narrators, and Chelsea. And you. We rely on you. We rely on you to pay our authors, staff, and cover our costs, and it is tough right now. So if you can support us, please do. We've got PayPal and Patreon subscriptions that start at $5 a month. Both get you access to our audio archive, which is crammed full of good stuff. If you like backstage access, maybe the odd sticker as a treat every now and then, the Patreon subscription tiers get you all sorts of goodies at the higher levels as well. Please help out if you can. It is always needed. If you can't help financially, please consider talking about us, because that helps a lot too. If you liked an episode, please link to it, or blog about it, or leave a review on your podcatcher of choice. Everything helps, and the more help we get, the longer we can keep doing this, and the more we can do. So, once again, thank you. PseudoPod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. That's also the case for episode 859, coming next week on Transgender Day of Visibility. That is The One Who Raised Sam Gowers from the Dead by Cynthia Zhang. Your host for that will be Kat, audio production will again be Chelsea, and we are so happy to have the amazing Sarah Ely back narrating it. And we'll leave you with this thought, because PseudoPod knows. PseudoPod knows they don't want us to spread it. That's why they won't let us leave. They're salting the soil to keep it contained. It's old. It has to be really old because the birds and insects and animals have learned not to land here.
An arm appeared from nowhere on the shape, seemingly projected like the pseudopod of a protozoan.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.